Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Resilient Advisor Show. My name is Jay Coulter, and joining me today is my regular guest and friend, Chris Versace, the Chief Investment Officer of Tematica Research, and we're going to flush through some stock ideas to be considering as we head into the Consumer Electronics Show. Happy New Year, Chris Versace.
Well, Happy New Year, Jay. I apologize. I thought we were supposed to make like the Ellen show and dance to the music as we come in. No?
Well, have you transported back in time with your Marty McFly vest for the show?
I am looking for the flux capacitor ahead of the Consumer Electronics Show, Jay. Yes.
Well, let's use that foresight to talk about some stocks for this year. What do you think?
Sure. It's going to be an interesting year, right? We're getting rising corona case counts, as we knew. We saw that in December starting. The rollout of the vaccines a little slower than expected. We're starting to hear about, UK, Scotland, Japan, with extensive lockdowns over the next 4 or 5 weeks plus. It's going to be interesting, Jay. So let's talk about it.
Yeah. Before we get into stocks, are there any macro thoughts on your mind or any data coming out that you can capitalize on?
So in addition to what I just said, which to me, as I think about it, and I've been thinking about this really since late November, early December, I do think that we're going to hit what I'm calling an economic and earnings speed bump in the first quarter. Expectations year over year, 22% for EPS growth or so for the S&P 500. I think that number, at least in the first half of the year, is going to have to come in a little bit. Now, the offset to that, that some people have said, and it's fair, is, Chris, the market is a forward-looking animal. And it is. It absolutely is. And as a result of the vaccines, again, slower than expected, but potentially poised to ramp up. I don't know if you saw the latest news, Jay, but they're going to get the National Guard involved with the rollout of the vaccine, which I think is fantastic. People are thinking more and more about the back half of the year. So my concern is that in the very near term, the December quarter earnings season that really starts in 10 days or so, we might be in for a little bit of a reset of expectations. I think as we move through the through the first half of the year, I think we can get a little more optimistic.
Excellent.
Oh, and that other thing you wanted to ask me about, retail sales. So, I know we want to talk about CES. When we look in terms of GDP components and things like that, key economic indicators, a week from today, we will get the December retail sales. And I think a lot of people are leaning on this. A lot of people are bracing for this number to figure out, did consumers open up their wallets? Where did they open up their wallets? And more importantly, how does it stack up against expectations? Normally, December is a very big spending month because of the holiday shopping season. But we've increasingly seen the pull forward. We've seen the shift towards online, and it's going to be, I think it's going to be an interesting print when we get it. Of course, we'll have to dig through it. Just some things for your listeners to think about. MasterCard said that for the holiday season, excluding autos and gas, sales are up 3% year over year. So that's a positive number. Not December. That's November and December combined, but still a positive number. Here's the thing: online, up 49% year over year. And when you or I hear online, we think Amazon, which I think is correct, but we also got to think about increasingly Walmart, Target. We want to look for those key enablers like a Shopify, SHOP.
Excellent. So I look forward to coming back to this segment at the end of the year because I think you're right. I don't forecast anything. I've learned that's a losing business for someone like me, but that's a very sound take. But my listeners like you talking about individual stocks. You say we have CES next week. When you said, Coulter, let's talk about CES, I said, Chris, what is CES? Started doing some digging.
I think what you said, Jay, I think what you said was, how do you spell CES?
Fair enough, Versace. All right, so walk listeners and viewers through what exactly CES is, why it's important,
Sure.
and we'll roll through some stocks.
So there's a number of reasons for investors to pay attention to what was once called the Consumer Electronics Show, probably one of the biggest industry trade shows that there is. And if you think about the shift in what consumer electronics were, right, Jay? When you and I were kids, back in the olden days, you know, you would think about new PCs, maybe new TVs, that sort of thing, projectors. You know, again, not to date myself in my Marty McFly vest there, but you know, the Walkman, the Discman, those sorts of things. But as we have become an increasingly digital society, the devices that we use, the types of TVs that we have, the thickness of the TVs we have, the displays that we have, and the technology that powers all this has continued to change. And I would put forth that a few things. One, CES is probably the biggest showcase of what we will see in one spot for products hitting shelves either the second half of the year, or as we'll learn about in some of the keynotes that we'll talk about, things that will come in the next 2-3 years. So it's always a fun and interesting time. I would say that as a listener for the event, you really want to cleave two things. One, announcements of new products, because that's really what matters in the short term. And again, these higher level keynotes that are more where we're going. That direction is important. You know, it takes time for companies to build in the ecosystem and the enablement of those products, right? So we want to pay attention to that from a directional perspective.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's get to the charts. Much like your partner, Lenore, we've got a lot of charts on this show. So Chris sent over the stocks, and we're just going to run through them.
Sure. So let's as we do that, Jay, let me use this kind of as a, you know, probably what's the biggest thing that we're going to hear in and around CES 2021. And I'm thinking it's going to be 5G. You know, Apple has introduced their 5G handsets, their smartphones earlier in, you know, September, October, November 2020, and all reports are that they are selling extremely well. In fact, Taiwan Semiconductor TSM came out and said, hey, guess what? Stronger than expected December revenue, and a lot of it is being pointed towards the iPhone 12. The great thing about CES, though, is this is the first time that we're going to see a wide array of 5G smartphones being announced. That likely means that there will be some at more affordable price points. You know, Jay, I know you're a big guy when it comes to, you know, gadgets and stuff, and I know you probably have, you know, the iPhone 12 or something like that, you know, like I do. But the reality is that not everybody wants to pony up for that type of phone product, whether they're in the US or outside. So when we start thinking about, you know, more affordable 5G phones, Samsung, Huawei, ZTE, HTC, and the like, these are the announcements that we're going to want to hear. But from an investor perspective, you know, buy the bullets, not the guns. We want to buy the chip companies that enable this to happen across all of these smartphone vendors and more. So the three companies that I would suggest that people really take a hard look at, first one is Qualcomm. They are extremely well positioned for this, for 5G, not just in smartphones, but as its new CEO, who was announced earlier this week, has stated, we're going to move the business past smartphones, IoT, or Internet of Things, and automotive, particularly as 5G connectivity pushes into those end markets. And when you think of Qualcomm's chip business, when you think of Qualcomm's business that is really twofold, chips and IP licensing, it's a powerful, powerful business model. So that's the first one that I like, absolutely. The next one is Skyworks. And candidly, we can talk about Skyworks and the next one, Qorvo, QRVO, almost interchangeably. They're both RF semiconductor companies. The cool thing about this is that as we migrate from, you know, we went from 3G, we're, you know, at 4G, and now at the early innings of 5G, not only is it more devices being connected, as I just said with Qualcomm, but because of the greater number of frequency bands in these devices, right? Can't just have a 5G only phone. The network's not fully built out. You need the 4G backward compatibility and in some cases 3G. So there's a lot more RF semiconductor dollar content in these devices. And that's a huge, huge positive for both Skyworks and Qorvo, right? Expanding market and expanding dollar content. That's a great combination for the two. I like them, you know, at the end of the year, like them going into 2021.
Chris, talking about 5G, break it down for somebody who is not tech savvy like myself and who is cheap. How much incremental gain do I get moving up to the 5G network?
Well, I think there's two ways to look at that. There's how much do you get? You will get faster data speeds, right? Lower latency, which is good for gaming and other applications. But it's also very good for the network providers. Why do I say that? Remember, Jay, that as a result of the pandemic, we saw a huge acceleration in data consumption, data creation, whether it's remote work, learning from home, just streaming from home, the
Live
use
stream.
of social media. Yeah, like this, and all of that, right? So effectively what has happened is the mobile networks as they were early in 2020 had to brace with a pull forward in network consumption that they were not likely to see for 2-3 years. So I think that's one of the reasons why when Apple announced its 5G phones that you saw very enticing offers from T-Mobile, from AT&T, from Verizon to upgrade to those devices. The faster they get people on the 5G network, the more they can take advantage of greater network capacity, lower latency, and better data speeds. So yes, a better user experience, but because of the characteristics of that network, it actually helps their overall network capacity as well.
Okay, excellent. Let's move on to the next stock that you're bringing to us today, Universal Display.
Yes. Now I want to talk about this company for two reasons. Most people talk about organic light emitting diodes, which is an emissive display, helps saves on battery life. There are really two key applications that we want to talk about here, at least today. Over the last several years, the big one that people think about is TVs. Okay, and I think we'll hear more about that. But the key here, though, is going to be in 2021 as capacity from Samsung, that actually manufactures the displays, LG Display, and others. That's going to be a very positive for Universal Display's IP licensing and chemical business. They make the chemicals that enable the displays. Here's the thing, though. The real volume application is going to be the accelerating shift in smartphone screens to organic light emitting diodes. And Apple has already committed, Jay, to migrating the number of iPhone models they have to OLEDs. So instead of using LCDs across their entire line, last year they started to introduce OLED screens, even more so in 2021. All of that is going to be a positive for OLED shares. And remember, it's not just Apple. Where Apple goes, others tend to follow.
Fair enough. Next, Taiwan Semiconductor. What are your thoughts?
Now I wanted to talk about this one really as a comment on some of the other companies out there. So Taiwan Semiconductor came out this morning, as a matter of fact, and they said, man, December sales were really positive. And that's just another point confirming what we saw over the last several weeks. If you go back in late December, NVIDIA, we'll talk about in a little bit, they announced an upside to their December quarter. Foxconn, which is a key Apple assembler, came out and said, woof, man, iPhone 12 volumes better than expected. And then this morning, Taiwan Semiconductor came out, December quarter's better than expected year over year, pointing to the iPhone and smartphones in general. So just a very confirming data point for what we were talking about earlier, really Qualcomm, Skyworks, Qorvo, as well as Apple, of course.
So you and I have the luxury of operating under the publisher's exemption. We're not giving stock advice. But when I look at this particular chart, it's up 107% over the last 12 months. Chris, how much of that news is already baked into this thing?
I think it's incrementally better, Jay. And I think it's one of those ones, if someone were to say, would you be buying this here? That's always a key question, right? If someone if I were to look at this chart, and it could be any stock out there, right? Just looking at the mechanics of the chart, I would say, wow, that is a rapid increase in a relatively short period of time, 8 months, 9 months or so. Understanding that when we look at the chart, the April pullback was because of the pandemic, so a sharp move lower than a snapback higher. What you see here in this company, though, is when we talk about artificial intelligence, 5G, AR, VR, right? As well as data center growth, and eventually, semi-autonomous, autonomous vehicles. This is the largest chip semiconductor foundry that will be making the chips to do that, all those things, right? So as we continue to become an increasingly, digitized society, they will benefit. Having said that, right, there are times when stocks get ahead of themselves. So if I was a investor, I would be thinking about that long-term opportunity. If I was new to the name and I saw a chart like this, I would probably say, probably a little overbought here. Let me take a look, keep it on my radar. If we get a pullback, then I want to circle back.
Fair enough. Have I said that 3 times? I wouldn't touch that thing with up 107%. My goodness. All right, talking about stocks that are
so
up.
Hey, hang on. So over one of the portfolios I manage, we have a company. You and I have talked about this. You can pull it up if you want. Farfetch, FTCH. Okay, and I'll be honest with you. I am struggling with this because in the portfolio that I manage at the street, we got in at like 680, 685. Okay, stock closed around $62 yesterday. Huge home run. Huge home run. But so have we trimmed out of it over the last year? Yeah, of course we have. That's the prudent thing to do. What I'm sitting there thinking though is, we mentioned this earlier. The lockdowns are continuing, right? We have certain parts of Europe that are, on intense lockdown over the next, 4 to 6 weeks. Japan as well. This is the online platform for luxury goods. So I sit there and I go, continuing to shift to online, luxury, on the balance, huge run up in the shares. At the same time, hey, we're likely to see that seasonal downtick in spending after the holiday season. So there's a lot going on here, and I'm trying to figure out what is the next move to do. Do we sell it? Do we trim a little more? Or do we just say, we've cut it down to the bare bones already, let's just hang on and see where we go? These are the things that I struggle with. So when I come to you with, solid recommendations, these are the things that I sweat through.
Well, and to be clear, stocks to watch are not stocks to buy. These are just stocks to keep eyes on.
Absolutely.
As you watch the show.
Correct.
Let's move on. And when you and I
that,
first started doing this, we talked about Apple every show, and then we literally went on like a 1-year moratorium talking about Apple. So it made your list again today. Tell me, what's on your mind as it relates to Apple and CES?
Well, it's going to be, first off, Apple's the one company that everybody wants to hear from that doesn't attend CES. Having said that, there tends to be a lot of chatter in and around CES about what Apple is doing. So when we think about it, for example, when we get to the keynotes next week, and I'll touch on this, one of them is going to be General Motors. And it likely means talking about the connected car and probably giving some seeds about first semi-autonomous driving and then ultimately autonomous vehicles. The news out this week is that, Apple's Project Titan, its own electric car, is continuing to move forward. Supposedly they have picked up more people from Tesla, but there was some news reported by Reuters this morning, Jay, that Apple is talking with Hyundai about being a Project Titan partner, meaning that they would manufacture the vehicles for Apple. So on the one hand, we want to pay attention to all the smartphone news that's coming out next week. I think it'll be a positive. I think when we hear certain things in keynotes about AR, VR, and even privacy, I think folks are going to want to think about Apple because those all play into Apple drivers as well. But it's also going to be these outside long shots that we're going to want to pay attention to for CES because Apple does have its hooks in those opportunities as well.
All right. Let's put Apple on the shelf for another 6 months.
You know what? All kidding aside, we probably won't. I say that because, Apple's gotten very good at spacing out their new product announcements and their new product events, which probably means we have an iPad event, February probably.
Yep. So we're talking about it again. I tell you, if you want to get some social media reach, you just got to talk about Apple or Bitcoin nowadays. And boy, everybody's tuned into it.
Don't forget Tesla.
Ugh. All right.
Hey, what? Let me ask you this. And I realize this is totally off the cuff, but it's worth just discussing. So at the end of the year, Tesla got into the S&P 500. A lot of folks see that as long overdue, almost anointing the company. But others have pointed out that usually when a high-profile name like that gets into the S&P 500, its go-go days, so to speak, are behind it. What do you think?
I think the challenge will come for the company's share price when there is a downturn in the market. because it will have downward selling pressure as people exit ETFs that are tied to it. Whereas in the past, it did not have quite as much exposure because it wasn't in the S&P 500 to that downward pressure. That's my thoughts. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that they have been a early first mover, pure play in electric vehicles, and they are doing good things. They are hitting their targets, or as we saw, I think early this week, they actually eked out a little bit of an upside surprise for deliveries for 2020.
Okay.
But to me, the long-term question is, can they compete when all the mainstream auto manufacturers are in the EV space, potentially at lower prices? What happens then? And that's the unknown. And here's the thing. I'm not the only one who's been thinking about this. So have other people. But we have yet to see Audi, Volkswagen, Ford, Toyota, Honda really push into that marketplace. That's why, when General Motors does a keynote at CES this week, I want to hear, what are their plans? Are they putting something down in writing, in blood, about what their plans are and when they will have models, not just being built, but on the floor for people to buy?
Mm-hmm.
That, to me, as more do that becomes the potential tipping point for Tesla shares, possibly.
Well, and we talked about this on a previous episode, Apple getting into this space. I mean, there are people to buy anything that Apple puts out. There are a lot of people that would do that. But on the other side of it,
I'm sorry, Jay. What do you mean?
On the other side of it, there's this dynamic now, and this is completely off what we're talking about, where some public companies are allocating part of their treasury to Bitcoin. Doesn't Elon Musk seem like the kind of guy that would roll out an announcement after the fact that they have allocated a certain portion of their cash holdings to Bitcoin?
Certainly possible.
Man,
certainly possible.
Man. All right, let's move on. NVIDIA.
Sure. NVIDIA. Okay, so we're jumping into some of the keynotes that I wanted to talk about. So one of the keynotes is going to be. So let me just back up a second. So there are 4 keynotes next week to be had. Verizon, which I think is going to be great for 5G. Okay. Again, they are making a real push with that particular technology, and that they were a launch partner with Apple. So I expect them to talk a lot about not just smartphones, but really start to talk about what they're doing for other 5G services. That's the very first keynote, and again, 5G centric. It tells me 5G is going to be a very big event throughout all of CES. Second is General Motors, third is AMD, and then fourth is Microsoft in terms of keynotes over the coming days. Let's get to NVIDIA now. So General Motors, again, they're going to talk about the connected car. What not everybody tends to realize is that your car is a unbelievable hub of chips and processors. Okay, and it's been that way and expanding that way over the last several years. But as we put infotainment into the car, as we put LiDAR into the car, as we have self-parking and all these other things that we've become accustomed to, or GPS, Bluetooth connectivity, for example, right? All of that, more and more and more chips. And I think that what we're going to start to see is conversation about putting all of that together in an integrated way in the car, kind of changing the cockpit of the car, if you will. So I expect to hear GM talk a little bit about that. And again, as their plans for semi-autonomous and electric vehicles, ultimately to the convergence, which will be with autonomous vehicles. But with NVIDIA, right, they are one of the key players in that marketplace, as is another company, which when I mentioned it to you, you scoffed a little bit, and probably rightly so, which was BlackBerry. Most people think of BlackBerry as the crackberry that they used to have, right? And that smartphone business that they had, where they were the one-time leader, great messaging device, horrible phone, horrible browser, all that other stuff, totally upended by the device we talked about earlier, the iPhone. Fine. The management team over time has morphed BlackBerry into a cybersecurity play, but they also have underneath a relationship with most of the major auto manufacturers for their Onyx operating system. Okay, to me, when you look at shares of BlackBerry, they're looking to secure endpoints, whether it's smartphones, and eventually cars. Because, Jay, the more connected we get, the more devices that become vulnerable, right? We tend to think about our computers. We tend to think about our smartphones.
Oh, yeah.
Think about your car. And there have been examples where people at different cybersecurity events have hacked into people's cars and shut them off remotely. So securing the car is key. To me, when we start talking about that, people start to think about that, that is a potential wild card upside for BlackBerry. And while I think you've got the chart here a little bit, if we were to pull it back a little bit, I think you would see that the shares of, they've rallied and moved back and forth along with the pandemic, but they are largely unchanged over the longer period of time. And I think the combination for BlackBerry of cybersecurity following SolarWinds, as well as what we're going to start to see with 5G and more connected devices, more vulnerabilities, and start to see some movement in the automotive market. I think those are all very positive catalysts for BlackBerry. The key here is people need to understand what they do. A lot of people still have that old mindset of, oh yeah, that old smartphone.
Right. I definitely did. Based on what you just said, I have a feeling I'm going to be looking into the prospectus this weekend. That's very interesting. All right, Activision.
Okay. So AMD is getting out, and they're going to be another keynote. They're going to be talking about gaming and leisure. And when we start to think about, the improvements in chips, the quality of gaming that we have seen, and when AMD gets out there and talks about some of the improvements we'll see in the coming year, potentially talking about the inclusion of virtual reality, augmented reality, I think we're going to start to see another change in how people game. And I think people are going to want to pay attention to any other announcements that Activision, Blizzard, EA, and some of these other gaming companies come out with during CES.
I tell you, that virtual reality looks fascinating, how far it's come along. I personally would have a hard time using a system from Facebook. Are there competitors in that marketplace that are delivering products at the level of the what's called Oculus product from Facebook?
So that's going to be a market to watch. And some of the companies you can imagine are, like Microsoft, Apple is talking about it, Google as well. But let's step back a second too and remember that while as much as we think about like augmented reality or virtual reality in gaming, there are a number of other applications out there. Everything from educational aspects, whether it's doing
homeschool,
simulated surgery. Well, simulated surgery, for example, right? The other example that you tend to see is in industrial applications where, for example, you are you're an airplane mechanic, right? And you're in the hangar bay, and you're switching from one aircraft to another. You can just pull up the manual on your screen, flip through the pages that you need. That's a huge productivity improvement.
Yeah.
Right. And again, it's those things that tend to really foster adoption. There's a lot of high profile, things that people look forward to, but it's sometimes, more often than not, actually, it's these quiet things that really lead to the bigger change.
Okay, the next one you sent over, I'm not familiar with.
This is a privacy company, so full disclosure, they are in our cybersecurity and data privacy index and the ETF by our partners over at Rise ETF in Europe. The reason I think that this company, most likely Norton LifeLock as well, again, Apple, OneSpan, and other companies that have been either in the privacy-facing space or talking about doing things with privacy. Microsoft has one of the final keynotes during CES, and the topic is going to be on, you guessed it, privacy. And I think that, when we think about the pandemic and the greater number of attacks that we've seen inspired by, work from home and phishing, and we take a look at what happened with SolarWinds attack where, malicious code was inserted that enabled other people to peer into government agencies. Rumor has it that some of FireEye's tools were stolen, as well as people taking a good hard look at Microsoft source code. I think that cybersecurity data privacy is going to be another big topic in the coming year. Privacy, though, too, as 5G, again, we talked about this with BlackBerry, simply expands the number of vulnerable endpoints out there. And this is going to be a big, big thing.
All right. Norton LifeLock, you've referenced it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, to me, it's probably one of the personal privacy plays where if you want to understand, is anybody, looking at your data? Is anybody trying to attack your data, use your data? That is the place to go. It's a subscription business, so I like the recurring revenue nature of the business model. I just think that, again, stock's been flat-ish, particularly since they declared that $20 special dividend last year. Remember as to why that was. They received a huge cash influx when Broadcom bought part of their business and spun out. As a result, Norton LifeLock was spun out. They are a dividend payer, which is nice, but they're, the key is, they are the privacy play to watch.
So, Chris, your company, Tematica Research, provides the intellectual property behind the RISE ETF cybersecurity index.
Mm-hmm.
Walk listeners through that.
Okay. So the
hang on,
so
man.
we actually,
I was giving you a softball there to wrap.
No, I know. So to be fair, we actually power 3 products out. Two with RISE. You mentioned one, cybersecurity, data privacy, sustainable future of food, ticker FOOD on the London Stock Exchange, and with our other partner Han ETF, we have the digital infrastructure and connectivity ETF. Now, we don't manage the ETFs. We, as you talked about, we power them with the intellectual property that creates the indices, and we support them with content. So, for example, when we were talking about Qualcomm, Skyworks, Qorvo, and I'm just looking at my notes, NVIDIA and some of the other names, those are all contained inside digital infrastructure and connectivity, or DIGI as we call it, which is the ticker symbol. Octo is in cybersecurity and data privacy, because we see just what I talked about in setting that up, right? As we continue to move into this digital world, increasing vulnerabilities, the number of attacks are going to change. More endpoints will be vulnerable, right? So to us, cybersecurity is a lot like insurance. You don't know when you're going to need it. But right. You're probably going to need it, and you'll be thanking the Lord that you have it. And that's true not just for companies, but also for investors as well, because we know that over the last 2-3 years, cybersecurity spending has been projected to grow X amount, and those forecasts have always fallen short. And then when we see a catalyst like SolarWinds, think back, Jay, to when Sony was hacked and some other high-profile attacks. It's only when you see that high-profile headline that people go, oh, cybersecurity.
Yep.
So we think that's a long-term opportunity. And I think the privacy as a result of GDPR, CCPA, the New York Shield Act, and others that are looking to protect individuals, that added aspect, which is rather unique in the marketplace, is a great driver as well for the cyber product.
Excellent. To learn more about Tematica Research and all the work that Chris does, please visit tematicaresearch.com. That's tematicaresearch.com. And if you're on Twitter, make sure you're following Chris. Man, I really appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate it, Jay. We unpacked a heck of a lot more than I thought we were going to, but it's always fun to do it with you. Thank you so much.